Welcome to Pacific States University's online lecture series for Gen 108, Explorations in the Arts. Today we are diving into the dramatic, geographic, religious, and stylistic shifts of European art between 1500 and 1600. I'm just so incredibly thrilled to guide you through this video overview lecture today. We're going to be looking at a century that literally fundamentally reshaped how we see the world, and we'll be tracing this really incredible arc of artistic evolution. So here is our roadmap for today's lecture. First up, we'll hit the Italian High Renaissance, followed by Venetian color and poetry. Then we'll get into Mannerism, which is basically an artful rebellion, before moving on to the Reformation and Northern art, daily life and landscapes, and finally, Spain and stylistic synthesis. Let's jump right in. Section 1. The Italian High Renaissance, spanning 1500 to 1520. Okay, so between 1500 and 1520, the Italian High Renaissance essentially set the absolute gold standard for Western art. You had major artistic centers like Florence, Rome, and Venice driving this totally explosive period of creativity. But here's the catch. They didn't all approach art the exact same way. In Florence and Rome, artists were obsessed with something called disegno. That meant they valued incredibly careful design preparation. They essentially built their masterpieces on rigorous, meticulous preliminary drawings. To them, the underlying structure and line, that was everything. On the flip side, though, down in Venice, they championed colorito. They focused intensely on the color itself and the actual physical process of applying the paint. It was just a totally different way of capturing reality. One relies on intellect and precision, while the other leans heavily into sensory experience and those really vibrant emotional hues. Now, when we talk about the absolute mastery of these techniques, we just have to talk about Leonardo da Vinci. He was an absolute master of chiaroscuro. That's the dramatic contrast between light and dark, as well as atmospheric perspective. But his true signature, the thing he's most famous for, was sfumato, which is this breathtakingly delicate, misty haziness. And he didn't just use this as a neat visual trick. He used it to deeply capture the human psyche. If you look at the beautiful piece on screen right now, you can see how he brings profound psychological insight into these biblical narratives, making them feel incredibly intimate. So while Leonardo was busy painting mist and deep psychology, his major rival Raphael favored something completely different. He was all about clear, calm beauty, using lighter tonalities and perfect architectural perspective. But then you have Michelangelo. Look at the sheer scale of the sculpted and painted figures he created, like the iconic statue we're showing here. They possess these insanely heroic physiques and just deliver a massive emotional punch. Michelangelo vastly preferred pent-up, coiled energy over Raphael's calm ideals. And this intense pursuit of monumental perfection, it extended right into architecture too. The leading architect of the early 16th century, Bramante, really championed the classical style of the ancients. In structures like the one sketched here, he heavily favored the central plan for ecclesiastical buildings, basically taking classical elements and combining them in entirely original, groundbreaking ways. Moving on to Section 2, Venetian color and poetry. Remember that colorito we talked about earlier? Well, the Venetians also developed the concept of poesia, which is exactly what it sounds like, poetical painting. Pioneered by the great Venetian master Giorgione, this style prioritizes mood and sensory experience over strict narrative details. The piece on screen is a perfect example of this. When you look at it, you aren't just reading a straightforward story on the canvas. You are actually feeling a visual poem. And Giorgione's contemporary Titian took this concept and totally ran with it. Titian won massive renown for his rich surface textures and these dazzling, nuanced displays of color. In fact, Titian was so influential that he basically single-handedly established oil paint on canvas as the standard medium of the Western world. So honestly, the next time you see a canvas painting in a museum, you really have Titian to thank for that. All right, Section 3, Mannerism, the artful rebellion. By 1520, the High Renaissance had achieved what honestly seemed like visual perfection. So, what do artists do when perfection has already been reached? Well, they rebel. Mannerism was a direct reaction to that High Renaissance style. Where Renaissance artists generally strove to create art that appeared natural and flawless, Mannerists leaned hard into artifice. Take a look at the incredibly elongated Madonna in the painting on screen. These artists were completely unconcerned with hiding the contrived nature of art. They actively threw out natural proportions, giving us these elegantly bizarre, stretched-out figures that look like they could really use a trip to the chiropractor. They utilized ambiguous space, departed from expected conventions, and presented traditional themes in highly unique, weird ways.
It was a massive internal artistic rebellion against naturalism.
Section 4. Reformation and Northern Art.
Now, while Italy was experiencing this internal aesthetic rebellion, Northern Europe was going through an earth-shattering external one, the Protestant Reformation. Immense, widespread dissatisfaction with the Catholic Church in Rome led directly to a totally fractured religious landscape. Protestants vigorously objected to the sale of indulgences and rejected most Catholic sacraments. But crucially for our study of art, they completely condemned ostentatious church decoration, viewing it as a dangerous form of idolatry. Because of this, artists could no longer rely on those flashy, grand religious commissions in Northern Europe. But, art didn't die, it just adapted. Printmaking suddenly rose up to play a massive, vital role in Protestantism because it allowed religious messages to be distributed widely, cheaply, and most importantly, modestly.
And enter Albrecht Dürer, an absolute master of this new medium. Dürer was actually the very first artist outside of Italy to become a true international celebrity. What makes his work so phenomenal, like the stunning print we're looking at right now from 1504, is how it reflects a deep, intense study of classical statues and the Vitruvian theory of human proportions, but it's executed with distinctively northern techniques. He figured out how to cleverly accommodate Protestant sensibilities while brilliantly mastering the exact same classical ideals we saw down in the Italian Renaissance.
Which brings us to Section 5, Daily Life and Landscapes.
Moving over into the highly prosperous 16th century Netherlands, citizens didn't really want massive altarpieces anymore. They wanted pictures of contemporary life that reflected their own values, and this created an entirely new genre. Take a look at the painting on screen. At first glance, it just seems to be a straightforward, incredibly detailed scene of a market stall totally packed with meat. I mean, it looks almost comically gluttonous, right? But if you look really, really closely into the background, the artist has actually hidden the Holy Family offering alms to a beggar. It's this brilliant, stark moral contrast being drawn between the rich gluttony of daily contemporary life and true, humble religious piety. This shift toward the secular world also gave rise to the landscape as an independent subject all its own. Peter Bruegel became the absolute specialist in this area. His masterpieces, like the beautiful snowy landscape we're showing here, are actually part of a larger series depicting the seasonal changes of the year and the very specific human activities associated with them. By this point, art had successfully moved completely out of the sanctuary of the church and right into the daily rhythms of nature and society. Finally, Section 6, Spain and Stylistic Synthesis. Let's move to our final region, Spain. By the late 1500s, Europe was deeply, deeply fractured. Think about it. We have the classical perfection of the High Renaissance, the emotional color of Venice, the contrived artifice of Mannerism, and the fierce religious divides of the Reformation and the Catholic response. So I want to pose this question to you. What do you think happens when all of these fragmented regional styles and fierce religious ideologies violently collide in a single artist? Well, the answer to that collision is El Greco. He became the leading painter of 16th century Spain, even though, as his nickname suggests, he was actually born in Greece. El Greco is the ultimate synthesizer of this entire century. His art, prominently displayed in stunning, complex masterpieces like the one on screen right now, seamlessly combined his early Byzantine stylistic roots with the elongated, weird spatial artifice of Italian Mannerism. And all of this was completely fueled by the intense, burning religious fervor of Catholic Spain. He literally took a full century of artistic evolution, threw it into a blender, and forged it into something completely uniquely his own. As we wrap up this video overview lecture, I really want to leave you with a final thought to ponder as you review your notes today. We've seen the High Renaissance achieve this incredible classical harmony, only to be immediately disrupted by the Mannerist focus on artifice, and then further fractured by the Protestant rejection of idolatry altogether. So did the religious fractures and stylistic rebellions of the 16th century destroy the classical perfection of the Renaissance? Or did they actually invent the modern concept of the artist's individual rebellious voice? Thank you so much for joining me for Gen 108 today, and I'll see you in our next lecture.